who is coming to us from the Dublin Institute of Technology and the Dublin School of Arts. He is a leading expert on questions of play, participation, cybernetics, technology and history in both the arts and related fields. Who is the author of a book called Participation in Contemporary Art Practices. It was published in 2005, and I believe he's currently working on what sounds like a converged history of complex systems in performing arts. But I'm sure we'll hear more about that this evening. And thanks very much, Timothy, for joining us.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, yes, thank you for the invitation. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to Laurie for all the help organising today. Okay, today, as Nicholas suggested, I'm going to present some material from a current book project of mine, provisionally titled Constructive Intelligence, Art, Design and Play After World War II, which tries to bring together different instances of how play and games were mobilised across art and design in the period following the Second World War. During this period, from the plastic arts to environmental design to landscape architecture and experimental pedagogical, play really redefines a combination, perhaps uncoupled from self-expression, and redefined as a combination of intuition and intellect. What in 1964 Maurice de Saumarez called a constructive intelligence. This intelligence was exemplified by children's exploratory play with rudimentary materials such as building blocks and, of course, with increasingly complex technical objects. And it took several forms across play sculpture, toy, playground design, pedagogical uses of play and games, experimental and adaptive architectures, and ludic exhibitions. My hope in this book project is to contribute something to a history of the ludification of culture, what the media theorist Joost Raasens has called the ludification of our present culture. The time when, according to game designer Eric Zimmerman, games promise to become the dominant cultural form of the 21st century. I suppose a game designer would say that. A history of how play and its associated grammars of action, as Alexander Galloway calls them, became integrated into everyday life. Most simply, it's an attempt to build upon Johann Huizinger's, by now famous claim made 80 years ago in his Homo Ludens, that culture arises in and as play and never leaves it. Central to this redefinition of play as a constructive intelligence was the convergence of play and cybernetics. And today, I want to discuss this, and I want to focus on 3 ludic exhibitions in a related design course that used play pedagogically, all of which took place between 1966 and 1970, and all of which in different ways brought play and cybernetics together. All of which, let me say as well, because I know this is the Centre for New Media, predated the popularisation of computing and new media technologies. Yet, I would argue, give us some insight into the behavioural and cognitive repertoires required by those technologies. Alex Galloway again has claimed that there's a very clear distinction between software-based play, such as video games and traditional games. I'm not so sure. Now, cybernetics entered into art and design practice through the 1950s, disseminated through reading groups, lecture programs, and art and design curricula. This is not my social graph, this is one put together by Hugh W. who's over in San Francisco, and Paul Pangro recently, that links computing design and cybernetics. A generation of artists and designers began to think of themselves as systems builders, working not so much with products and objects, but with information and communication systems, cybernetic apparatuses, and therefore required to organise what Roy Ascot was called fields of behaviour. For some, of course, open, complex, non-hierarchical systems offered a corrective to a post-war society that was largely controlled by what Peter Gallison has called the Manichaean sciences of operations, research, game theory, and of course the military-industrial applications of cybernetics itself. By the end of the 1960s, a fully fledged systems counterculture had emerged, as Bruce Clark has written, which sought to detoxify, I quote, detoxify the notion of system with its military, industrial, and corporate connotations of command and control, and to redeploy it in pursuit of holistic ideals and ecological values. By now, this history is pretty well studied. The work of Fred Turner, the work of Lewis Clark himself, Ron Eglash, Christine Filipponi, Howard Lee, and a number of others. Today, as I said, I'm going to focus on the perhaps less studied phenomenon, which is the convergence of cybernetics with play during this period, which also was an attempt perhaps to redirect cybernetics, to redirect systems building. I want to show that play is very much a social technology for this cybernetic age, and that through games, toys, and interactive exhibitions, cybernetic ideas of interaction, feedback, and systems modeling expanded into the social domain. And as we dig down into this shared history of play and cybernetics, we will find that both a generation of users, or of course players, who were trained to behavioural and cognitive repertoires required by these objects. Let's go back to the immediate post-war period. A key factor in this convergence of play and cybernetics was the spread of educational toys, playground equipment in post-war Europe and the US. Amy Agata has shown how these educational toys were supported by artists, designers, indeed several US arts institutions in the 1940s and 1950s, in an effort to promote creativity and imagination through play. Just to give you an indication of what takes place here, I thought about this redefinition of play. So we move from play as a sort of form of subversion in many practices and exhibitions of the historical avant-garde, to play as something which is much more engaged in construction and systems modeling. To understand this change, we can then consider these two exhibitions. On the left, you have Marcel Duchamp's famous 16 miles of string, which he constructed for the opening of the first Papers of Surrealism exhibition in Manhattan in October 1942. Duchamp wound this string back and forth between the fittings to form a web that thwarted viewers' attempts to clearly see the collection of surrealist works on display. He also requested the art collector Sidney Janis' 11-year-old boy to bring his friends along to the opening and to play games with, through the string. So here we have play as a way of disrupting the protocols of the exhibition space. On the left, on the right, we have the play sculpture competition, which was organised by MoMA, along with Creative Playthings and Parents magazine, from June to August 1954. So here we have toys, games, play, integrated with art, sculpture in particular, and also used for educational purposes. Similarly, and this brings us in line with cybernetics, you might consider some of these modular educational toys in particular. On the left you have Magnet Master, which was distributed by the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis in 1938. And on the right you have, of course, recognize it's one of the toys designed by the Eames, by Charles and Eames in the 1950s. English critic and curator Lawrence Alloway gives a sense of how we might approach such toys and games as cybernetic in the 1956 review of the Eames design. Of particular importance to Alloway is that these toys and games allowed what he called a large margin of permissiveness regarding usage and interpretation by the spectator. An Eames toy or game was, and I quote again, a design system that permits the creation of other systems, and the user system validates that of the designer. I'm going to come back to Alloway and an exhibition that he created in 1968 a little bit later on. For now, I just want to develop his insights with the cybernetic account of play given by Stafford Beer in a series of 6 radio lectures called Designing Freedom, the Canadian Public Radio broadcast in the autumn of 1973. Cybernetics for Beer was what he called the science of effective organisation. It wasn't necessarily confined to computing, of course, computing had a role to play in effective organisation. It was much more of a way of modelling social systems. Beer models an organisation with individuals on poles connected by strings. You can see 2 of his drawings from the typescript for this radio lectures on the left. The ball hanging from a string below them represents their net output, the net output of the system. You can see this at the top left. A cat playing with that ball, you can see the cat about to presumably play with the ball at the top left, represents an environmental disturbance of the system. Beer then describes 3 models for how an organisation deals with this disturbance, which you can see represented in the bottom left. The first way to deal with it is to shoot the cat. The second way to deal with it, which you can see on the left-hand side of the drawing, is top-down regulation, so to install a hierarchy that deals with these disturbances. The third way, and obviously the way that Beer is to play with the cat through rule-based flexible management structures. Play is this third way because it distributes agency through rules and constraints. It also organises by reducing variety within the system, but not too much. And it promotes learning and accommodation to devices which are then treated as toys, which might be cats or they might be more complex objects. In Beer's account, interestingly for us, the voluntarism for which play is often lauded is less important than its capacity to organise and manage complexity within systems. Again, play reduces the environmental variety by producing variety in the game. This actually corresponds with a description of play proposed by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi and Steve Bennett in 1971. Play is experienced, they write, when it is impossible for the actor, player, to differentiate projects available by voluntary fiat from assessed situational possibilities. In other words, there is play when a player's capacity to act matches the possibilities of the requirements for action within a certain environment. A primary function then of the much discussed magic circle of play, again first described in Huysmans' Homo Ludens in 1938, is to maintain an environment of manageable and, so to speak, playable complexity. If complexity exceeds the capacity of the player to act, then that player is more likely to experience confusion and anxiety and uncertainty in play. Now, with this initial cybernetic description of play in place, I want to introduce my first 2 examples. These are 2 exhibitions curated by Jasia Reichardt at the ICA in London in the late 1960s, very early 1970s. The first is Cybernetic Serendipity, which took place from August to October 1968. It represented the work of over 130 participants, including composers, engineers, artists, mathematicians, and poets. And its ambition was to combine the science of control of communication, cybernetics, of course, with the faculty of making happy chance discoveries. The exhibition had 3 parts. Firstly, computer-generated graphics and computer-animated films. Secondly, cybernetic devices, which is works of art, cybernetic environments, which we're going to look at in a moment, remote-controlled robots, painting machines, painting machines, and then the third part, which was machines demonstrating the uses of computers in an environment dealing with the history of cybernetics. So, installation of the Cybernetic Serendipity. The second exhibition, Play Orbit, was what might first seem quite different. An exhibition of toys, games, and playables, which was curated in collaboration with Peter Jones and the Welsh Arts Council. I'm going to try and bring these 2 together. Cybernetic Serendipity saw connections between creativity and technology, and cybernetics in particular. Whereas Play Orbit tested what a toy might be by much less technologically sophisticated means, and was not explicitly related to cybernetics, at least not by writing. Nevertheless, the 2 exhibitions shared a participatory and ludic mode addressed to their visitors. As Maria Fernandez has argued, both encourage visitors to interact with non-human entities, which might be objects or machines, and interrogated the boundaries between pleasure and play. Indeed, judged by media reaction at the time, the principal achievement of cybernetic serendipity was to show that visitors would interact with computers and machines through play. As Leslie Stack of the ICA proclaimed, we want people to lose their fear of computers by playing with them. A famous example of such devices was that constructed by engineer and cybernetician Gordon Pask. This was his colloquy with mobiles, which you may be familiar with. Pask, as you probably know, was also headed the Cybernetics Committee for the Fun Palace, which was the secret prize. The colloquy consisted of 5 robots, 3 female and 2 male, which rotated axes. The males had drives, Pask calls drives, which built up over time as charges on a capacitor. To satisfy these drives and to discharge, this is where it gets a little bit dodgy, the males sought females by a directed intermittent light. If a female synchronized her rotation with the male, so the light reflected back from the mirror on the female to a receiver on the male, the two would lock into each other, and the male would discharge. This interaction is complicated by the following 3 things. First of all, the males competed for the attention of the females as they hung from the same bar, as you can see in the center, on the same bars. The males could also alter their drives, and the females could remember which drive matched which male. Therefore, they had the capacity to form couples. Thirdly, the colloquy, although it didn't require human interaction, also allowed for it. And apparently what also happened was that female visitors would use their compact mirrors to disrupt the interaction of the different parts of the machine. That's all I know. I don't know exactly what mine else. Now, obvious gender stereotyping aside, Paul Pangro actually has just reconstructed this and claims that Pask is being ironic with this gendering. Who knows? Pask's interest was in symmetrical or reciprocal systems that might converse in some way. The colloquy was what he called an aesthetically potent social environment designed to promote pleasurable interaction without the need for complex instructions or explanations. It was, and again I quote, a socially oriented, reactive and adaptive environment that incorporated much of Pask's diverse interests in self-organizing, adaptive communication systems, which again may or may not include humans. The colloquy changed its structure according to the nature of the games that were played with it, or that it played amongst its different parts, and exhibited at least some of the properties of the self-organizing system: decision-making, competition, collaboration. But of course it could only expand through human involvement. In Pask's view, such environments, which were multimodal communication systems, showed how to humanize technology through pleasurable dialogues and play. Such is the colloquy's importance that, as Maria Fernandez argues, it may be discussed as a contribution to art, cybernetics, engineering, artificial life, and even sociology. Now I want to discuss Play Orbit, which, as I said, might not immediately strike you as an exhibition concerned with cybernetics. Hopefully I can convince you otherwise. In 1968, Reichardt invited 100 prominent artists resident in Britain, or British artists living abroad, to submit any toy-like or game-like work of art that they might have made, but often might not have exhibited, to a group exhibition which equaled 100 toys. At this early stage, the exhibition was already anticipated to depart from the norm. The introduction of toys into the exhibition space required a transformation in its architecture. In a letter in February 1968, the keeper of Whitworth Art Gallery in Manchester suggested that 100 toys might travel north after a run in London. The toys, he wrote, were to be displayed in an environment something like a climbing frame, involving swings, seesaws, curly staircases, and play areas, where we asked the art colleges to create giant interpretations of traditional games. He then infused, I think it's going to be one of our most exciting exhibitions since Cybernetic Serendipity. After receiving only a handful of submissions, Reichardt sent out an open call. The toys that resulted all came mostly from art students and early career artists, because of the open call. So there was no jury selection. The works were only limited by size, so they had to be 6 foot by 6 foot or smaller. Also, many of them, of course, were educational toys, such as we've seen earlier in Dublin and elsewhere. More importantly, Play Orbit's introduction of toys into the space of art exhibition changed what I'm going to call the ontology, and I know that this means something else for you than the way in which I'm going to use it. So basically changed the type of thing that the work could be, and also what affordances allowed as a result. This ontology privileged performance over representation, as in most cases a player was to learn what a toy could do rather than saying what it might stand for. I would argue then that both exhibitions demonstrated Reichardt's long-standing interest in the encounter between cybernetics and art. In the book The Computer in Art, published in 1971, Reichardt notes that the cybernetic notion of feedback in particular, and I quote, has entered the world of happenings as well as various environmental constructions, where audience participation and reaction can alter the appearance and even the context of the work which it fills. Again, play organizes this interactive, self-regulating relationship between the technical object, which might be a computer, or something as rudimentary as building blocks, and its users. And at this point we can develop our initial cybernetic account of play further with the idea that a toy is a black box. I just want to jump out of this. I'm just going to leave this on in the background. This is footage of the play exhibition. It's silent. So, players enter into a performative relationship with the toy without the need to understand fully its internal mechanisms, which makes the toy, either in whole or in part, a black box. For Andrew Pickering, cybernetics has a black box ontology. To explain this, consider Ross Ashby's description of the doorknob from his An Introduction to Cybernetics in 1958. A child trying a doorknob learns to match input to output without seeing or understanding the internal mechanism that undoes the latch. The doorknob is a black box, Ashby writes, whose internal mechanisms are not fully coded to inspection. This, I should just say, should just explain it. This is from, there were 3 parts to the exhibition. One was a relatively straightforward display just of toys, which couldn't be touched or interacted with. The second was mostly educational toys, building blocks, different types of games, board games, things like this. And then the third was this space which allowed for all kinds of rough and tumble play. 1969. It's a little unusual to have this going on in art. Anyway, back to black boxes. Yeah, to paraphrase Ashby then, when faced with a black box, the question, what is in it, becomes redundant. Other questions are more pressing, such as how should I proceed? Which elements of the box are discoverable and which are not? What methods can be used to investigate the box? More formally, is there a protocol that would correlate inputs with outputs over time? In Pickering's view then, aside from its infamous, if somewhat overstated relationship with systems of technocratic control, the most important aspect of cybernetics is that, and I quote, it tries to address the problematic of getting along performatively with systems that can always surprise us. Okay, I'll say that again. It tries to address the problematic of getting along performatively with systems that can always surprise us. In trying to get along with these systems, an experimenter couples herself to the box so that the two can form a system of feedback. Ashby goes on to state that a black box can represent anything from the investigation of an electrical network to a psychiatric interview at which questions aim at alpha, beta, reporting answers G, F, H, I. We're elicited. Yet perhaps the only way to engage with the unpredictability of the black box is to play with it, to transform it into a toy. A toy might be an example of a black box. Just to note that Charles Baudelaire's essay from 1848 called Morale de Joujou actually gives us a sense of how, again, a toy might be a black box before that term was even invented. And I quote from Baudelaire, the child twists and turns his toy, scratches it, shakes it, bumps it against the walls, throws it on the ground, and in doing so displays a first metaphysical tendency. However, when the child at last opens it up and asks herself, but where is the soul? So begins what Baudelaire calls stupefaction and sorrow. In order to avoid the onset of these emotions, the player learns to leave the black box closed enough so that the system, box, and player might retain its soul, so they continue to play. In the Pathé footage that you just watched, two children appear to risk stupefaction and sorrow as they play with Gordon Fletcher's wobbler, which is not supposed to do the things that they're doing with it. A sphere with black tentacles, which when wobbled, activated a trip mechanism that just basically bounced. But of course they're taking it apart. The children roughly spin wobbler upon its base so that its two hemispheres begin to separate. They pay no heed to the artist Gordon Fletcher's wish that the trip mechanism would cause the tentacles to wobble, hence the name, and obviously have little knowledge of wobbler's internal mechanism. Yet we can see that the children are entering into this performative relationship with something that they are only just managing to keep as a black box. I now want to move on to pedagogical use, playing games, where we begin to get, again, an understanding of cybernetics, if it were. We begin to get a much more expanded understanding. One of the contributors to Play Orbit was the English artist and designer Simon Nicholson, a close friend of Reichardt. At the time of the exhibition, Nicholson was visiting lecturer across several University of California campuses. He'd arrived at the College of Environmental Design here in Berkeley in 1965 and offered a lower division course called Design 12 in 1966, which was supposed to provide three-dimensional, I quote from the University course catalogue, three-dimensional design experience in the use of machine tools. Design 12, however, did something quite different. It ran for only 1 year because of complaints from members of the faculty. However, it had no prerequisites except Introduction to Design, which allowed architecture and design students to work closely with those of other departments, especially from the natural and engineering sciences. Students worked in teams of 3 or 4 according to a schedule divided equally into the 3 parts of invention, construction, and testing. The final 2 stages of each project consisted of a trial where the structure and device was tested on local children, followed by a report on its successes and failures, supported by photographic evidence. 2 papers were required for assessment, a systems exercise and an evaluation exercise. For the first, students summarized what the structure needed, indicating principal interactions and subsystems. For the second, they assessed the character and degree of involvement between the structure and its players. Of the almost 50 projects completed by Design 12 students in the first year, few records remain. The image here shows a sculpture by Nancy Page, Peter Ogilvie and James Shaw in 1967, which is in fact a wind tunnel, what we see, which was supposed to demonstrate the aerodynamic properties of various objects, actually valves, to assemble a group of school children. The diagram on the blackboard behind shows the valves and chambers of the heart. Student structures were first and foremost pedagogical, in this case used for elementary physics demonstration. Other examples, we can see here photographs of other examples of works. Again, these are relatively straightforward as toys, they're relatively simple. They're not complex at all, they're not technically complex at all. And yet again, they're very much described within what I'm going to try to explain as a cybernetic apparatus of testing, feedback, assessment, evaluation, adaptation, retesting, and so on and so forth. They very much included the users within the design process. For Nicholson, the course engaged 2 aspects of design. First, what he called design methodology, and secondly, systematic design. First, design methodology and systematic design. Secondly, education, specifically the area of self-instruction. Self-instruction was actually central to the discovery learning that was promoted by the US elementary science curriculum, which sought to, at the time, was sought to promote children's scientific literacy and general intellectual curiosity. improvements to the curriculum were actually headed by Berkeley Professor of Physics Robert Karplus. The Design 12 handbook included an article from 1966 written by 4 Berkeley physicists to detail the benefits of what they called self-instruction demonstration exhibits, which were on show in the Lawrence Hall of Science. These devices allowed students to perform experiments of their own in controlled environments outside of the classroom rather than to rely on lecture demonstrations. Such was the influence upon Nicholson of these self-instructional devices that in 1968 he declared that nearly all the main developments in art and design education have been made by scientists. Something of a controversial claim. However that might be, Nicholson's courses constructed what I would call a cybernetic apparatus. As I've said, just a testing, feedback, evaluation, adaptation, and further testing. All centered upon play. The view was to give a principal planning and assessment role to children, understood as natural players who, if asked and listened to, sort of solicited for feedback, would detail the requirements of play. And my deepest apologies for the blurry photograph of the photograph on the right-hand side. But this is one of the surveys that Nicholson used with the children, where he's just basically listing different variables. Do you want sand? Do you want mud? Do you want more water? Do you want different coloured objects? These would be filled in by the students into a colour-coded scheme, and then would be given back to the by the children rather than they would be given back to the students so they could adapt their designs. Now, when transported beyond the classroom, this cybernetic apparatus was supposed to teach players, teach children, but also to teach students about human ecologies, the complex systems by which people interact with their natural built environments. Nicholson believed that the miniature environments, think of Pask here, built by students offered what he called tremendous scope for research into animal-machine systems, perhaps even plant-animal-machine systems, and their possible role in education. Nicholson, very much influenced by the adventure playground movement, saw a natural evolution from the participatory design of playgrounds to community involvement and interaction in the total process of design and planning. If children were integrated into the design process from the beginning, Nicholson claimed, the process of community involvement, once started, never stops. Idealistic, but still. After Design 12, Nicholson saw that adventure playground could make its design methodology what he called 4-dimensional. Through them, he and his students tested participatory design methods and sought to revitalize community involvement, starting, of course, with the youngest generation. Now, of course, and I'm only going to spend a moment on this, he was not alone, he was not the only one to see that to try to encourage this natural evolution from adventure play to community involvement and environmental understanding. There are a number of people at CED who were trying to foster this at the time, most notably, of course, Sim van der Rijn and his Outlaw Build Studios, one of which, ARC 284 from 1968, you can see on the right, posters from it, which went around local schools and tried to help them to build adaptable architectures, to change the classroom, change the structure of the classrooms, and try to also promote an understanding of recycling, how to recycle materials and how to use recycled materials. On the left-hand side, a little bit later on, you see a map of the environmental yard, which was a project initiated by Robin Moore and Herbert Wong at Washington Elementary in Berkeley, which sought to basically take a fully tarmacked playground, and you can see on the bottom part of it here, introduce ponds, pathways, foliage, bushes, so on and so forth. Again, it was part and parcel that the Berkeley Schools District was trying to bring the curriculum out of the classroom and into the playground. I was going to talk about Exploratorium, but I might just shift on to the last example, which has maybe a closer relationship with new media. And here we go back to Lawrence Alloway. By the time he came to create the exhibition Options, an exhibition of kinetic and interactive art at the Milwaukee Art Center and then at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago in the summer and autumn of 1968, Lawrence Alloway had used cybernetics to analyze games and ludic sculptures for over a decade. In 1957, Alloway wrote that many sculptures were now what he called arenas for human activity and playgrounds, and that this made them, like the Eames games discussed previously, design systems which can incorporate without noise the systems of any number of spectators. The kinetic works in Options were likewise design systems that could, again, I quote from Alloway, hold their identity through the aimless contributions of players. Each had rules to be discovered and offered options and variables from which a player had to select. Each also produced a sensorium that was multimodal, with the player's attention expressed by touching, changing, moving, in addition to looking. And you can see this is the cover of the catalogue, and you can see what it's inviting, what the exhibition is inviting people to do. Play me, squeeze me, walk on, sit in, hold me, turn on, talk to bulb. This is a work, Cybernetic Sculpture System by Wen-Yin Tsai from 1968. This is indicative of many of the works that were on the show, which were really kinetic works. So works where interaction was perhaps limited to one or two, limited to quite a reduced interface, if you like. This would vibrate, like some of the sculptures from Nan Gabo, actually from the late 1920s and early 1930s, would vibrate. These metal rods on this platform would vibrate at different frequencies according to footsteps, how many people in the group, and so on. However, the exemplary work for Alloway was Tony Martin's Game Room. A work that Martin called an environment, so an interactive environment that operated very much like a multiplayer game. The floor of the room was divided into coloured quadrants. Each contained a photoelectric cell, which when stood upon activated the slide projection on the corresponding wall. You can see the work installed not in the Options exhibition, but in the Howard Wise Gallery in New York. The projectors were mounted on a rig attached to the ceiling and were fitted with coloured lenses that corresponded to each quadrant. And the slide carousels were almost 700 images of animals, trees, different types of artwork, abstract patterns, and so on. In the middle of the room was a simple circuit board that allowed players to change the sequence of slides and light effects. You can see the man in the white shirt trying to do something. Martin provided a list of instructions for where to stand, how to interact, and what each colour theme that was projected might signify. The player was reminded that her choice of colour would affect the options available to others within the room, and was encouraged to make her choices prevail. So it was a competitive aspect. As with previous examples, the work was supposed to humanise the relationship between new media technology and humans through the social structure of the game. Now, recently, Tina Rivers, drawing on Alexander Galloway's gaming book from 2006, has claimed that Game Room exemplifies counter-gaming. Its slide sequences were sometimes delayed. A projector might project on another wall to that which the player intended. And the function of the switches on the central console was unclear, all of which frustrated players' attempts to act rationally in pursuit of the goal. Game Room therefore performed an implicit critique of the expectations of gameplay. What Rivers describes are actually instances of what Galloway calls non-correspondence, where controller input is uncoupled from gameplay. Now, while I accept Rivers' analysis, we should not forget Alloway's point that the games in Options were systems were designed to incorporate this kind of noise, this kind of non-correspondence. Play very much manages this complexity, and I think we're back to the cat here, toying with the ball and string. Play is a very good way of managing this kind of organisational complexity. I think we're also here, we return to play as a kind of disorganisation, whereas I'm much more interested in it as a form of organisation. Now, where does all this leave us? Well, I've shown a few examples to suggest how a generation of players were, through these kinds of interactive exhibitions, but also through experimental pedagogies, trained to the behavioural and cognitive repertoires required by technical objects of varying complexity, all the way from building blocks up to something such as the game. Central to these was the convergence of play with cybernetics. Peter Weibel wrote 10 years ago that prior to the spread of computing, and indeed computer art and new media, interactivity and virtuality, and what he calls an algorithmic culture, began in things such as kinetic art and op art. In these latter, one finds, I quote Weibel here, rudiments of rule-based algorithmic art. Today, like Weibel, I've discussed what Galloway calls algorithmic cultural objects, beyond the computer, some of which are very simple. I would add to Weibel's account that we need to understand how such technical objects might foster, perhaps not disruption and disturbance or non-correspondence, but something much more in line with whole systems design. At issue in these examples was the development of what media theorist Gus Razens has called ludoliteracy, a play competence that, in his words, is applicable across the full spectrum of media. This play competence might involve playing by the rules, bending the rules, changing the rules, adjusting the system or playing the system. Razens points to the need for a ludoliteracy at present. I would try to expand what is understood. I would try today just to expand what is understood by this literacy. In the recent past, in the examples discussed above, but also elsewhere, this literacy developed through expanded involvement in cybernetic apparatuses, in which one finds, I think, a distinctly post-human understanding of play, applicable to complex technical objects such as computers, but not overall limited to them. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you. So we have a bit of time for questions, quite a bit of time. Or clarification, or other examples, or...
I would ask a question to you, which is that history is usually about the present, even, and so I think it would be incredibly interesting, especially in today's culture of the context of today's culture of interactivity and the I'd love to hear a little about why you feel this work is important in the contemporary context and what lessons you feel it might teach us.
There's a few points. The first would be maybe to try and show that there is a connection. I've only done a little bit of that today, but to try and show that there is a connection across various types of technology in the way in which people interact. That software-based games, talking about galleries, software-based games do not introduce this kind of absolute distinction between two types of play. That would be the first point. The second point would be maybe, obviously, to uncouple play from things like individual expression, which I think is still very much associated. And I think when you begin to look at the way in which play was understood cybernetically, you first of all understand it's a social phenomenon, that it's a way of engaging with and very much co-evolving with technical objects and with each other in interaction with technical objects. And thirdly, that it's maybe a way of learning about how to build systems. And I think this is maybe the most important point to me, is that I understand River's point about game room and the emphasis on things like counter gaming and the use of play as a disruptive tool, I would say. I would be cautious in using play in that. That's fine when you're in the 1950s museum space, where there are very strict protocols as to how we might interact with it, to largely not interact with objects. But I think we're now addressed so often as plays, both in museums, but also in the workplace, in education, in consumption, various types of consumption, that I'd be cautious of using play as that constructive tool. What's much more interesting in my view is to use play constructively, to use it as a kind of organisational method. And I think that's where, and there's therefore a kind of educational tool as well. And that's where I think, that's maybe the distinction that I'm trying to get at between the game room and what was taking place coming out of the adventure playground movement in Linz and what we were. I think that's, yeah, that's it.
Any questions?
Thank you first. I guess maybe I missed some examples, but it seems like a lot of the educational examples you had were directed towards children, whereas I feel like that's very much, I mean, everyone thinks of children as players, everyone thinks of them as playing, and then that seems to be lost, or there seems to be this idea of like, oh, we stopped playing at a certain point, or at least in the way that we did. Were there many examples of play in this way that you're describing, like directed more towards adults, or directed, yeah, just not towards this child audience?
I hear your point that children are often considered to be exemplary players, and that they're a model for. I think it reminds me of one exhibition that took place in the Berkeley Museum in Stockholm, which was organised by a Swedish architect called Paul Nielsen. Basically, just brought an adventure playground into the exhibition space and built a balcony around it, and the adults were restricted to the balcony, and they had to watch children play and learn from them how they might reorganise their social lives. And it's written about by Nielsen in these very plaintive tones. We've lost so much. We need to learn, relearn how to live. Having said that, most of the exhibitions here at Cybernetic Serendipity was not necessarily addressed at children at all. Even Play Orchid, the publicity video shows children of different ages. The accounts of the exhibition, again, adults played and were quite happy to play in these exhibitions. Similarly with Game Room, I mean, this is something that wasn't necessarily directed at children at all. So I think there's a continuity, and one thing that does interest me about some of these examples is that they maybe move away from that very romantic idea of children as, they need to be left alone to play. Well, I think that was the idea, certainly within art education. I'm not entirely sure within design education, but certainly within art education, that was the idea predominant in the interwar years, in the immediate post-war years, where you didn't intervene at all. You just had to help them develop their means of self-expression and emotional intelligence and so on. Whereas, as I said, I think what's really interesting to me is that we begin to get this change through the 50s and through the 60s in particular, where play is a way of learning about technical objects, it's a way of learning interaction between each other. It's not at all understood as a naive form of interaction. So.
No, it's good. Yeah, no, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Questions? Go ahead.
Really interested, thank you. I'm really interested in the notion of the black box as it comes up in this talk. Because it seems like, today when we talk about technological black boxes, there's such a normative imperative to open them up.
Yeah.
And I think in a little bit later in that time, like computer literacy movements, that black box of the computer, the intent was to open up the computer, to get to know it intimately. Yeah. A lot of that was through play as well. Anyway, but here in the black box examples that you mentioned, there's a sense that you need to actually protect the black box as a closed thing in order that it retain the soul.
Exactly.
And so I'm curious if that sparks any thoughts in you about this relationship between order and disorder, this boundary that play maintains between breaking in, disrupting, right, the closeness, and keeping the closeness. I don't know. Yeah, just more thoughts on it.
In that respect, I would be fully with Heutzinger. I wouldn't go along with everything that he says, and certainly the idea of the magic circle. Yeah. So for him, it's play is order, absolute order. It maintains an absolute distinction between the play area, whatever it might be, playground, the pitch, even just something as rudimentary as forming a circle of players, and everything else. And it has to maintain that. I think, there's been a lot of studies subsequent to Bateson that have shown the fact that it's much more of an exchange between one system and another system. I think it's not something that I've really thought through thoroughly, but it is something that's really fascinating to me, the idea that you have to keep the toy closed to some degree. You think of it as a black box. So yeah, if you start undoing it, then it falls apart, obviously. And the capacity to play then obviously disappears. There's a difficult tension there between play as needing to maintain a black box and play as a type of learning. And I won't pretend to fully resolve that. But yeah, I'm with Bateson that play is a form of order, it's a form of organisation. That only half at best answers your question.
Yeah, thanks for your talk. Really interesting stuff. And my question kind of goes with the last two questions. Maybe less in terms of black boxing and more in terms of rigidity. It seemed like a lot of these toys were first about what can I do with it and then how does it work. And there's some control around not breaking the toy. But it seems to me that you want in a cybernetic system, or I would want in a cybernetic toy, the ability to leave an impression on it. And this example that's up on the projector right now seems to be like the first introduction to this sort of creativity, or let me be competitive, let my inputs affect other people's inputs and outputs. I'm just wondering if there are any examples of other toys from this time that could be pedagogical that weren't just about how do you use it or how does it work, but some way of impressing itself on the instrument.
I think certainly some of the more rudimentary play structures. So, the simpler the object you have, the more potential the object has for different types of activity. Certainly that's an idea that you get in playground equipment. The best playground equipment does not, has a wide variety of performances. It doesn't limit things to a certain type of interaction. Certainly playground equipment has changed significantly because of the need to regulate it for health and safety concerns. So certainly within adventure play, again, the understanding that you just give children materials, you don't even give them toys, and then you see what they can do with them. You allow them to build, and if they build something that doesn't work and doesn't allow for play or doesn't function, in the way that they want, then they take it apart and they build something else. So that's very different from the sort of adventure playgrounds that you might now have, which are, rope swings, ladders and things like this, and they only allow certain kinds of activity. That would be the first example. Do something out of adventure play, where you don't actually give the toy, you just give materials. And then children don't only learn what the materials do, but they also learn about how they can work together to build something. And that was certainly one of the main reasons that adventure play was lauded, was that it gives children not just, they don't just learn motor skills and certain types of cognitive skills, but they also learn kind of civic responsibility to each other. Yes?
So a little bit back to the question of the black box, I'm thinking in particular, like as an example, the octopus.
The wobbler.
The wobbler thing.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm really fascinated by this question of like where a play situation exceeds the boundary that's been set up.
Yeah.
And it seems like when I think of when I know of cybernetics or the sort of systems thinking, that there's always kind of a larger scale of nested relationships.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think of with the wobbler, like, okay, so they like don't use it the way it's supposed to be used, they take it apart into pieces, and then something happens.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of like a continual.
You don't see what they might make.
And then a black box, once you open it up, contains black boxes within it.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm wondering where, like, how do you, in the work you're doing, like, how do you track this sort of continual disintegration of the subject?
Oh, I know. I mean, you know, I didn't make a distinction between first order and second order cybernetics. The problems that you pointed to, the problems that arise in second order cybernetics. We have observers of observers of observers. Some of Heinz von Forster's drawings of these kind of nested mission doll kind of structures are interesting. The question there is about, as you said, system boundaries. I think, especially when you're talking about play, you're not talking about a game. So you're not talking about rule-based play, or play that has rules that you have to discover. I think it becomes very good. How do I draw the boundaries? In the absence of a game, yeah, you just have to look at how people use it. In this instance, I don't have any access to look at how the children then went on, whether they, as you said, when they took it apart, to then use these materials for some other purpose. Which comes back to your question, whether these also then became black boxes. It does point to the difficulty of designing toys. I mean, one thing that Jasia Reichardt found when she asked 100 British artists to give her, to send toys, to submit toys to this exhibition, was that many of them were, even if they made toys, say for their children or for their family, were unwilling to submit them because they didn't consider them works of art. But secondly, perhaps this largest group was terrified of designing toys for children because they realised just how difficult it was to maintain this balance between the black box and the learning something. I mean, this is, as a toy, it's pretty poor. I mean, you press it and it wobbles. No wonder they're tearing it apart. You know? Anyway.
All right, let's thank you very much for spending your time. I will say to all of you here, for those of you who this may be your first time at Berkeley Center for Media, we are a radically interdisciplinary campus center that sponsors along with the history and curated media series that this is in. We sponsor the Art, Technology, and Culture lecture series at Bank FA, which has events the following, the next 2 Mondays. We have Kalani Nicole on the curator of contemporary electronic art on Monday at 6:30, and then the following week the artist Carrie Tribe. So I hope to see you guys there.